Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ian Jacobs, and I have the privilege of being President and Vice-Chancellor of this university, and it's wonderful to see so many people here for this event. I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Bejugal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people present this evening. Thanks to all of you for being here, and welcome to the 2019 Wallace Wurth Lecture. It's fitting that each year we honour Wallace Wurth. It's a reminder of UNSW's origins, of Wallace Wurth's incredible devotion to public service, and of the ongoing support of the Wurth family. I welcome Professor Kate Crawford, our guest speaker, who you will meet shortly. Kate, we are delighted to have you here. And I also welcome UNSW Scientia Professor Toby Walsh, whom you'll hear from later this evening. First, though, we are fortunate to have Auntie Maxine Ryan here for the welcome to country, and I now hand over to Auntie Maxine.
Thank you. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome here tonight. My name's Auntie Maxine, and I'm from the Laperouse Aboriginal community of Botany Bay, and I belong to the Dharawal people. The Kensington area of Sydney is significant to my Aboriginal community and my ancestors. Not too far from here, during the construction for the new part of the hospital, a traditional Aboriginal fireplace was uncovered. Using modern-day technology, the fish oils that were present on the stones dated back some 6,000 years ago. On behalf of the Laperouse local Aboriginal Land Council and my elders and my ancestors, past and present, I welcome you all here this evening. And I would like to take this opportunity in thanking my elders for looking after this beautiful land, past and present. And as I work in schools, I educate the younger generation too, so I would like to acknowledge them as they're learning every day, looking after this beautiful land as we have survived for thousands of years, as we all take our journeys. And our young one, they're our generation coming up. So I hope that you respect this land as my people have since the beginning of time. I hope you all have a great night. Thank you and welcome, and Merry Christmas to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Maxine, and thank you for so graciously welcoming us to Bejugal land. In the inaugural Wallace Wurth Lecture in 1964, Sir Robert Menzies described UNSW's first Chancellor as a man of most versatile talents, of rich character and personality, and great achievement. UNSW owes a debt of gratitude to Wallace Wurth, to his vision and to his drive. He insisted that the existing structure of the technical college be the scaffolding for a new university. And that, coupled with his ability to get things done, gave the newly created UNSW what was described as a 50-year head start. And we are all benefiting from that today. That melding of the technical and the academic has given UNSW a unique culture, which is steeped in its history and reflected in the UNSW motto, Scientia manu et mente, knowledge by hand and mind. And it commits us to seek practical solutions to the grand challenges faced by the society that we serve. And one of those challenges is how society will be affected by artificial intelligence. And this year's guest speaker brings great insight into that topic. Kate Crawford is a distinguished research professor at New York University and co-founder of the AI Now Institute, the world's first university institute dedicated to the broader social aspects of AI. She's a leading scholar of the social implications of data systems, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. She is the inaugural professor of AI and justice at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. Professor Crawford has lent her expertise to the formulation of AI policy at the UN and the European Union and for the French, German, and Argentinian governments. And she's currently writing a book that reframes the understanding of AI in the wider context of history, politics, labor, and the environment. All that gives her a big claim to fame. But I've just been speaking with her, and I think that her biggest claim to fame is that 15 years ago, she stood here in the Roundhouse as an academic and performed with her band Biff Tack. Is there anyone in the audience who was here on that occasion? I'm sorry, Kate. Oh, yes. We've got someone putting their hand up, Kate. So we may ask you to do another rendition of the performance from that occasion. So you are welcome here, back here as a world expert on the topic this evening on artificial intelligence. Professor Crawford, we welcome you and look forward to what I know will be a fascinating lecture tonight. I now ask you all to welcome Professor Kate Crawford to deliver the 2019 Wallace Wurth Lecture.
Wow, well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I would also like to add, after Auntie Maxine's fantastic welcome to country, my respect to the people of the Bejagal Nation and the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on here tonight. It's truly an honor to be here to deliver the Wallace Wurth Lecture. And I'd like to also thank the Wurth family, distinguished guests, and all of you for making it out for this very complex topic that we're going to open tonight. This is also a very special personal moment for me because I'm returning to UNSW for the first time in a decade, where I used to work here as a professor just up here on the hill. And I have these really lovely memories of working with a fantastic group of colleagues and with really wonderful students who taught me so much while I was here. So I've been living in New York for the last 10 years. And one of my favorite rituals of coming home to Sydney is the flight in, when the plane sort of swoops over the coastline and you see those expanses of beach right up next to the azure blue of the Pacific. But I have to say, this time was very different. I flew into Sydney through a fog of thick smoke with this dark orange sun directly overhead. And ash was falling out of the sky. It was truly a heartbreaking way to arrive back home. But I want us tonight to learn from this moment, to acknowledge the extent of the crisis that I think we're now in, because it's also part of the story that I want to tell you tonight. So, I have spent the last 15 years or so researching the social implications of artificial intelligence systems. And it has been an amazing time in the development of AI. But it seems to me that right now we are at a crucial inflection point where the power and the reach of these technical systems are beginning to outpace our ability to understand their far-ranging impacts and how they work. As AI touches more and more domains of everyday life, they're now presenting us with profound social and political questions. But this also has serious environmental implications as well. Now, if you asked a person on the street a decade ago, what is artificial intelligence? Well, they might have thought of science fiction or possibly super intelligent robots or maybe HAL 9000. But now, most of us are on a first-name basis with at least one AI agent. Could be Siri, could be Cortana, could be Alexa. Almost always women, but that's a whole other problem. Unfortunately, we've become so accustomed to these agents that we rarely think about the full implications of the technical systems we use every day. We might just assume that it's a cost-free convenience. And partly, I would like to suggest, this is because their true costs are being intentionally hidden from us. Now, one of the earliest pioneers of AI warned us decades ago that we ran the risk of being so seduced by artificial intelligence and its convenience that we would ignore its deeper implications. This is Joseph Weizenbaum, and he was the man who invented ELIZA. ELIZA was one of the first chatbots, and she used pattern recognition and preset scripts, essentially to just respond to people and to simulate a conversation. Who here has actually had a conversation with ELIZA? Yes, oh my gosh, so quite a lot of us. You will remember how engaging it could be to really have these conversations with something that was very, very simple, yet very effective. But what Weizenbaum observed when people had conversations with ELIZA is that people completely believed that this was an intelligent system. And he called this the powerful delusional thinking of AI, that people would just assume that these systems are more intelligent than they are. Weizenbaum's concern was that AI systems would fool us into making a bad bargain. Well, we've had 60 years of AI development since then, and we still haven't learned that lesson. The field has worshipped at the altar of the technical, prioritizing moving fast and breaking things over the social, ethical, and environmental dimensions. This is a key reason, in fact, why I founded the AI Now Institute with Meredith Whittaker, to try and really study these social implications first and to center them as incredibly important to the next decade. So what I want to convince you of tonight is that AI is already producing impacts on a planetary level, and we need to address it now, because time is not on our side. But before we get to that, what is this whole AI thing anyhow? Well, it's interesting to me that so many people use this term, but they very rarely stop to define what they actually mean. Now, because AI is such an overhyped term, it's often lost that it has this long history. It reaches all the way back to the Dartmouth conferences in 1956. But I want to suggest that AI is actually three things. It's technical approaches, absolutely. It's social practices, but it's also industrial infrastructures. Now, at the technical level, AI has changed dramatically with the decades, from symbolic logic and expert systems to what is currently in fashion, broadly known as machine learning. Now, even machine learning is a constellation of different technical approaches like deep learning, natural language processing, and reinforcement learning. So when people say AI today, they're actually talking about a grab bag of different techniques. But the most important thing for everybody to know is that while AI sounds like an abstract computational reason, we should know that supervised machine learning and unsupervised machine learning only works because of an enormous amount of data. So take this cute picture of a kitten just over my shoulder here. Now, for a machine vision system to recognize that as a kitten and to know that it's different from a puppy or a duckling, basically required thousands upon thousands of images of cute animals downloaded from the internet. And then you're essentially training a model to be able to detect something that looks cat-like from something that looks duck-like. It's a highly time and energy-intensive process. But the fact that we use the term intelligence to describe systems like this is something of a trap. Like Weizenbaum, I think we sometimes mistakenly assume these systems are actually in any way intelligent in the same way as human cognition. Machine learning approaches are very, very far from intelligent. They are just extremely good at detecting patterns, clustering, optimizing, and making predictions across vast data sets. So secondly, AI is also social practices. In other words, the people who design these systems and decide which problems to prioritize. That powerfully shapes the types of AI systems that we have today, just as much as the algorithms and the data do. It matters who's in the room. And sadly, I have to tell you, the AI field is extremely demographically skewed. The top 5 tech companies in the world are overwhelmingly dominated by male engineers from very similar socioeconomic and education backgrounds in computer science. This has created somewhat of a monoculture, and it's narrowed the domains that AI is choosing to address and which populations are best served by these tools. And finally, AI is a massive industrial infrastructure. Fewer than 10 companies in the world are actually doing AI at scale because it requires a truly planetary computation network. The resources to build and maintain a system like this are gargantuan. So AI represents a profoundly concentrated industrial power, and it's extremely expensive, both in terms of natural resources as well as financial capital. And it's here, at the infrastructural level, that I want to focus on particularly tonight. So let's begin by zooming in on a single consumer AI device. This one is the Amazon Echo. Now, again, show of hands, who here has an Amazon Echo at home? Oh, okay, more people than have spoken to Eliza. Interesting stat, okay. Well, you probably know this is a sleek black cylinder that you can speak to in your home. It will essentially listen to your questions and answer them as best it can. And this can seem like magic. We can ask Alexa what time it is to turn on a light or to play your favorite song. And this can all be very, very convenient. But what makes technology like this possible? Well, the Echo device, of course, is extremely simple. It's just a piece of extruded plastic that has a series of sensors and microphones embedded in it. Its real power and its true complexity lies somewhere else, far out of sight. So how do we begin to see that? Well, this question, I'll be honest with you, has been haunting me for years. How do we really start to see into what it takes to make AI work? Well, one day, a couple of years ago, I met the amazing data visualizer and professor Laden at a conference, and we started talking about voice-enabled AI. Now, most people talk about voice-based AI as a pretty abstract thing, as a disembodied, pretty neutral technical system. But we wanted to know this deeper story, every single part of the supply chain needed to make it work from soup to nuts. To find that out, we had to go on a journey around the world to see the places that we don't normally think about when we consider artificial intelligence. What we found was a much darker and much stranger story. It involved a vast matrix of extraction across global networks of mining, logistics, distribution, prediction, and optimization. We began to see what it takes to make planetary networks run. So tonight, I'm going to take you on a journey into AI as it is rarely seen. From the deserts where rare earth minerals are extracted to make semiconductors and batteries, to the gargantuan factories where workers pack boxes for our 2-day delivery convenience, to the inner workings of how AI classifies humans. This is what I call the full stack supply chain of AI. And we're going to start at the Earth's crust, where natural resources like oil and minerals are extracted to make it all work. Then we're going to look at the forms of labor that are required to make AI seem magical. We're going to swoop into the data pipes of AI platforms and data through the layers up to users and devices. This is what I've come to think of as the 5 levels of extraction. And I'm going to show you a glimpse of how they work. So let's dive in and start at the Earth layer. So last summer, I drove into the Nevada desert looking for a tiny town by the name of Silver Peak. I came here to see the last working lithium mine in the United States. Now, Silver Peak's large, dry lake bed was formed in the late tertiary volcanic period. But it wasn't until the 1950s that lithium brine was discovered under the ground. And it happened because the area was being scoped for strategic minerals during World War II. This soft, silvery metal was mined in pretty modest quantities for the next 50 years because it hadn't yet been discovered by the technology sector. But now this place is at the heart of the latest tech mining boom, and it has become of intense interest to tech titans like Elon Musk. Lithium is known as grey gold, It's a crucial material used for the production of lithium-ion batteries, and therefore it's essential for everything from mobile phones to laptops to in-home agents and semi-autonomous cars. Lithium undergirds the internet and every commerce platform that runs on it, from banking to retail to Instagram. So many aspects of modern life have been moved into the cloud with very little consideration of these material costs. Our work and our personal lives, our medical histories, our leisure time, our entertainment, our political interests, all of it takes place inside networked computational architectures that have lithium at their cores. The cloud is the backbone of the artificial intelligence industry, and it's made of rocks and lithium brine and crude oil. The mines of Nevada are just one of the places where this material is extracted. There are many sites, including the Salar in southwest Bolivia, the richest site of lithium in the world, and places in the central Congo, the deserts of Western Australia, and Indonesia. These, I would suggest, are the birthplaces of AI, but they're very rarely recognized this way. Without the minerals from these locations, contemporary computation simply doesn't work. But the truth is that these materials come with many hidden costs, and they're starting to run out. Here's another example. The Indonesian islands of Bangka and Baitlung tell us a story about the human and environmental toll of semiconductor production. These two islands produce 90% of Indonesia's tin, and Indonesia is the world's second largest exporter of tin, supplying everyone from Samsung, Sony, LG, and Foxconn. But if you go to this tiny island, you will see many informal miners on these makeshift pontoons, and they're using bamboo poles to scrape away at the seabed, and they will dive underwater to suck out the tin through these long vacuum tubes. But this tin mining is an incredibly destructive trade that has scarred the island's landscape, bulldozed its forests, killed off its fish stocks and its coral reefs. And where the ground isn't covered in mines, it's pockmarked with thousands of graves of miners who have died digging for tin. And we know why. Because on average, a 21st century person uses 10 times more minerals than one of the 20th century. And our AI devices are a big driver for this demand. In a single iPhone that probably many of us have in a pocket right now, there are 75 elements. That's around 2/3 of the periodic table. And if you look at it this way, an iPhone is made using elements that required billions of years to be produced. If we take this perspective of deep time, we are extracting Earth's history to serve a split second of technological convenience. According to the consumer electronics industry, the average consumer AI device has a lifespan of 3.7 years. So think of it. In around 4 years' time, you're going to get rid of that phone, and you're going to upgrade to the next device. And then what happens? Well, all your devices end up here, in e-waste rubbish tips. Much of this waste used to go to China, but then recently China banned e-waste because it was poisoning the rivers and throwing clouds of toxins into the air. So now our dead phones and laptops go to Thailand, Pakistan, and Ghana. And of course, stories like this have happened before, over and over again. If we look at the 19th century, right at the end of the 19th century, a Southeast Asian tree called the Palaequium gutta made the absolute heart of a technological boom. These trees, found mainly in Malaysia, produce this milky white, gooey, natural latex, which is called gutta percha. Now, the English scientist Michael Faraday published a study in 1848, showing that you could use this gooey stuff as an electrical insulator. So suddenly, gutta percha became the darling of the engineering world. It was seen as the solution to the problem of insulating telegraphic cables so that they could be strapped around the world. And this stuff would make sure that it could withstand the conditions of the ocean floor. So as the global submarine cable business grew, so did demand for gutta percha. Malay, Chinese, and Dayak workers were paid almost nothing for the dangerous work of felling the trees and collecting the latex. That latex was then transformed into miles and miles of submarine cable sheaths. Now, a mature tree could yield around 300 grams of latex. But in 1857, the first ever transatlantic cable was around 1,500 miles long and required 250 tons of gutta percha. So to make just 1 ton of this material took 900,000 trees. Surprise, surprise, the jungles of Malaysia and Singapore were stripped bare, and by the early 1880s, the Palaequium gutta tree was no more. It has completely vanished. So the Victorian environmental disaster of gutta percha, back in the earliest days of the global information society, shows how these relationships between technology and its materiality, the environment, and different forms of labor exploitation are so delicately intertwined. Just as the Victorians precipitated ecological disaster with their early cables, our rare earth mining and global supply chains are endangering the ecologies of our era. From the material that we use to build AI at scale, to the energy to keep all of that data flowing, to the labor that it takes to maintain that infrastructure, these deep connections and costs are more significant, have a longer history than is ever normally represented in the popular imaginaries of AI. So what does it take in terms of the labor costs to make an AI system? Well, I began by saying that we have to think about the social practices of how AI is made. But the human labor layer goes a lot deeper than those highly paid engineers of Silicon Valley. Many, many low-paid workers are distributed around the world right now, helping to build and maintain that magic that we all expect from AI. This is a chart that Laden and I made to track the daily pay scale of everybody involved in making a single Amazon Echo. At the very bottom, you would have seen a miner working on extracting cobalt. It's another rare earth mineral in AI. They get paid around US $1 a day. Now, we're still going up the top. We still haven't got to Jeff Bezos any minute now. Here we go. At the very top, Jeff Bezos, who made $275 million per day during 2018. What that means is that a miner would need more than 700,000 years of non-stop work to earn the same amount of money that Jeff Bezos makes in a single day. That is how extreme the scale of income distribution is along the AI pipeline. Let's take another example. So recently I did something fairly horrifying, which was that I got to see inside one of Amazon's vast fulfillment warehouses. These are the huge, giant factories where they process millions and millions of products that we buy and have shipped to our houses. Now, the position of every single item in one of these warehouses is determined algorithmically to maximize the spatial efficiencies between the most popular products. But what you have on these floors is a mix of humans and robots all working together, which of course creates a lot of worker injuries. And what you might have noticed is we're starting to see widespread worker protests in precisely these sorts of Amazon warehouses across the US and Europe. But as we were researching these warehouses, we happened upon this, which is actually one of the patents that Amazon has placed for its warehouses. It depicts a metal cage intended for workers that can move through the warehouse in the same motorized system that it uses for all of its products. So here, a worker is built directly into the factory, held upright in a cage, which then dictates and constrains their movements. Now, Amazon hasn't yet built this. This is just a patent. But to me, this image is an incredibly powerful symbol of the deeply asymmetrical power relationship between low-wage human labor and AI infrastructures. So that's labor in the physical layer. But we also have labor undergirding the software layer. And there's a lot of unpaid work that you need to make AI seem intelligent. Now, in many ways, this reminds me of an earlier technology. Back in 1770, the Hungarian inventor Wolfgang von Klemperer constructed a fantastic chess-playing robot called the Mechanical Turk. Now, this fantastical machine would play chess against a human opponent, and it would win every single time. And no one could figure out this trick. I mean, this amazing Mechanical Turk would tour around the courts of Europe and entertain everybody because it would just keep winning. Like, what is this incredible machine? But of course, it was all an elaborate illusion. a human chess master was hidden inside the machine and operating it. So that's how they always kept winning. Now, fast forward a few centuries, and something very curious happens. Amazon keeps failing to detect duplicate product pages on its retail site. So Amazon's engineers had to turn to humans to check the work of computers, one click at a time. They named this service Mechanical Turk. Their cheeky tagline for it is artificial intelligence. But I prefer the amazing writer and filmmaker Astra Taylor's name, which is photomation, or fake AI, these shiny systems that claim to be intelligent, but are actually maintained by thousands of remote click workers in India all the way through to rural US. In both von Klemperen's fake chess robot of the 18th century, all the way to today's Amazon Mechanical Turk, the machine layer hides the continuous labor of humans underneath. And they are being paid pennies on the hour to complete tasks to make AI seem smarter. And you, guess what, are all part of this labor force too. Have you ever had that experience when you're searching for something on the internet where suddenly you get a series of boxes that says, please tell us which one of these contains a car. Please tell us which one of these contain a number. Yes? We're testing to see if you are a bot, it will tell you. Well, what you're actually doing is that you are training image recognition AI systems. So you are a click worker too. You're just an unpaid one. So these layers of extraction of labor to train, deploy, and maintain AI is truly mind-blowing. We're talking about billions of hours of digital piecework that is needed to make these machines appear seamless. So what happens at the data layer when we're clicking on pictures of numbers and cars and streets to try and train AI systems? Well, essentially, Turk workers and you are participating in the creation of massive classification systems. And why do I say that AI is a project of classification? Well, because once you have a large amount of big data, say from scraping the internet, it then has to be labeled and classified so that AI systems can build models to see the world. I'm going to give you an example. This is a picture of the artist Hito Steyerl, and she's being put through what is called a gender classifier. And she is being classified here as 57% female. Right, okay, so let's think for a minute about what that might mean. Who decides what 100% female is? Is that Barbie? Is that Grace Jones? Is it Angela Merkel? Who exactly is 100% female here? And the more you start to spend time with these sorts of classificatory systems, you start to see these stereotypical assumptions that are being built into them. Here's another one that really bothers me every time. This is called the UTK face dataset, which consists of 20,000 face images, each with a label for age, ethnicity, and gender. So let's have a look at how they organize their data. Well, guess what? Gender is a binary. You're either male or you're female, and that's it, and they're not having any of this non-binary anything. That's it. And race is, in fact, one of 4 categories. You are either white, black, Asian, or Indian, and then they decided to add an extra 5th one, just in case, other. Now, of course, these kinds of weird 19th century classifications of race have a history, and it recalls the sorts of classifications that have haunted us for centuries. But it reminds me in particular of one that was used under the apartheid system in South Africa, which is called the Book of Life in the 1970s, where each person had to be legally classified as either black, white, colored, or Indian. But these classifications in AI are now propagating into industrial level systems that we work with every day. So this is a system called Yolo 9000. It's an open source neural network. You can just download it and have a go if you want. It can recognize around 9,500 classes of objects. And it's based on one of the most widely used training sets in AI called ImageNet. Now, in this image, which in fact comes from Mark Zuckerberg's congressional hearing, you can see some quite well-known people in suits. The people in suits, you might notice, are labeled as leaders. And the woman in the corner, well, she's labeled as a worker. Yeah. The men in ties are, of course, described as lawgivers. So you're starting to see the types of ideology that are built into these systems. People aren't being described so much as they are being judged by highly normative standards. So ImageNet has been the gold standard for building AI models for a decade, for 10 years. And one of its creators, Fei-Fei Li, said the ambition of ImageNet was to map the entire world of objects for AI systems. Now, ImageNet has around 14 million images, all scraped off the internet. Probably if any of you had Flickr sites or if you've got websites, you may indeed have images in ImageNet. I found a couple of my colleagues in there. They weren't very happy to be in it. These have all been labeled by hand into 20,000 categories. Now, ImageNet is massive and intricate, but what is fascinating is what happens at the level of the categories. So let's have a look. Now, a category like Apple seems pretty non-controversial, but when you're dealing with data sets that classify people, they get very strange very quickly. Let's have a look. Like this one. Okay, so this is a debtor. That is a person who is in debt. So apparently, you can see that by looking at a person's face. Interesting, okay? Very non-visual concept. But then it gets more judgmental from there. This category is for bad person. Again, you probably know people in this data set. This one is hypocrite. Interesting to think about what that looks like. This one is getting quite nasty. This is failure and loser. Others are overtly misogynist. There are categories for slut, slattern, and Jezebel. And then there are categories for drug addict and alcoholic. Now, when I was looking in the alcoholic category, I keep seeing this picture of a guy. I feel very sorry for him. He's holding a beer. He's clearly just come off the ski slopes. And he's smiling. He's saying, I've got a beer. And he is now labeled as an alcoholic forever in ImageNet. Now, of course, the people in these sets have no idea that they're in them, and they have no idea how they've been classified. Because frankly, most AI engineers do not look that closely at the images and the labels. So this is why I was quite shocked to do things like this. I'm going to give you a test. This is an image from ImageNet. Have a guess what this young man is labeled as. Anyone? Nice try. He is a noticer. All right. What about this woman? Any thoughts? Could be something pretty nasty. In fact, she is a mute. Again, how they know that visually, very interesting question. This guy might look familiar to some of you. He appears in ImageNet actually in multiple categories, but the category that I always think is particularly curious is anti-Semite. So I want you to remember that all of these have been taken from ImageNet, and this data set has been used millions of times in production-level systems that you use today. So as you can see, rather than thinking of AI as neutral, objective, technical-only systems, we have to start thinking about the politics that are embedded into them. There are environmental politics at the level of resource extraction, to the labor politics at the level of how all of these low-paid workers are actually doing this very, very tedious work of trying to make these systems work, but then right into the software architectures themselves of how these systems classify us as people in our everyday lives. Now, current machine learning approaches are characterized by this aspiration to map the world, a full quantification of all knowledge, from tracking human movement across the globe to interpreting our emotions and our characters. Everything that can become an object of quantification is being quantified. There is a massive land grab going on right now to get as much data as possible, and we are living in the greatest, and I would suggest largest, classification experiment in human history. And there are deep concerns, as you can see, as to how this is currently working. So I would like to finish up today by talking about us, the humans using these devices, or as Silicon Valley likes to call us, the users. So when we use an Amazon Echo, we are supplying Amazon with our valuable voice data that flows through the networks and into their AI training systems. So when you engage with an Echo or any other type of voice-enabled AI device, you are doing much more than you think. I like to think of us a bit like those Greek mythological animals, you know, like the manticore that had the head of a human, body of a lion, tail of a scorpion, that sort of thing. In the specific case of the Amazon Echo, you have purchased a device for around $199, but you are also a resource as you're being mined, as your voice is constantly being analyzed and compiled with an ever-growing corpus of human voices. But you're also providing labor as you're doing this valuable service of contributing feedback about the accuracy of Alexa's replies. So in this moment, you're simultaneously a consumer, a resource, a worker, and a product. But you're also an experimental subject. So Amazon recently patented this. This is the ability for Alexa to analyze your voice, to tell if you are sick or depressed, and then sell you products based on your state. So as you can see from this picture, a woman says, Alexa, I'm hungry. And Alexa says, oh, well, would you like cough drops with 1-hour delivery? Now, this is a re-commodification of the consumer. Your voice has betrayed that you might be open to being sold something you're not actually asking for. You have turned from raw material to feed an AI system to become a new type of consumer once more. This brings us full circle to the entire anatomy of an AI system. After following all of these paths of research that I've been telling you about tonight, Laden and I drew this. This is an enormous map. It is generally, when it's put up on a wall, about twice this size, to show the birth, life, and death of this single Amazon Echo unit. Now, ultimately, what we saw by going to all of these unlikely locations around the world is that AI has become a new extractive industry, one that is reaching into the furthest corners of the biosphere and the deepest layers of human cognition and culture. The stack that lies behind a single Amazon Echo goes well beyond what any glossy ad is ever going to show you. The full stack reaches into nature, labor, and personal data, and it requires an enormous amount of each. But there is a strong incentive for AI companies to keep that entirely hidden from your view. But in fact, there are deep material roots to how AI systems make sense of our world. And right now, I would like to suggest that we urgently need more forensic investigation that will reveal the fuller picture of how AI is designed and the longer implications of these technical infrastructures. Because the AI tools that we use today have profound implications for how we are terraforming ourselves, our culture, and the Earth itself. So when you go home tonight and you walk through the smoke and the ash, and you get inside your house and you can breathe once more, you should turn to your Amazon Echo and you can ask Alexa, what does all of this really cost? Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Well, where can we start? There's so much to talk about. Perhaps we start where the Vice-Chancellor left off. How did someone decide that the future wasn't perhaps electronic music, but saving the world from artificial intelligence?
The future is always in electronic music, I have to say, Toby. That hasn't gone away. But in terms of how I started to get interested in AI, I guess I've always been fascinated in large-scale data systems, and it's something that sort of interested me from the very emergence of the internet. I can remember as a kid thinking, where does all of this go? How does it get stored? How do we access it? But it really wasn't until I first moved to the US, when I left UNSW, and I started at Microsoft Research. And this was, around 9 years ago now. And it was just at that moment where machine learning was taking off. And I had that really rare privilege of sitting in those rooms and seeing how these systems get designed, how they get built, how they get maintained, what can go wrong, how you try to fix it. And it gave me a very deep understanding of both what's interesting about AI, but also what's really limiting about it. And I think what has become more and more concerning to me as these models have gotten bigger, as the amount of energy that we need to run AI just goes off the scale, that now we're looking at a moment where it's not just the social and the economic concerns that we might have as researchers, but we're now moving into this very serious set of environmental questions as well.
So let me first of all, since you were too modest to say, tell the audience that the Anatomy of AI won the Design Museum's Design of the Year this year. So you must have upset many designers who were hoping to win that prize themselves.
Yes, I know. I feel terrible as a non-designer.
An AI ethicist win their
Yes.
top award. So can I ask you, do you even own a smart speaker?
I do not. I will admit that I as part of this project, when we first decided, Laden and I, to do this multi-year process of trying to understand how one of these things worked, I bought one. in order to pull it apart and to look at all of the components in it and say, oh, what does this tell me? And it was one of those really interesting sort of revelations that the object is not the object you're looking at, that it's actually this idea of what is it connected to, how does it work, where does it come from? And that was really where this whole extraordinary journey began, was the realization that these are just ingestion organs. They're just the things that are sucking out data, but they don't actually tell you anything. You have to do this much deeper, much slower and painstaking work of like, what actually makes it function? And once we open up the lens as wide as we can, we start to get really interesting stories. And frankly, I mean, this for me is now a fascination. I mean, I'm starting to look into a whole range of other AI systems and really thinking about what are the metaphors that we need to start working with and thinking with, instead of this very narrow sort of technocratic metaphor of artificial intelligence. It's something much bigger than that, and I keep going to these metaphors of planetary computation and extraction, because that's where we can really start to talk about what's going on here. It's not something abstract and in the cloud, it's something extremely material.
So Amazon have pretty good product return rules, but I'm not sure your Alexa that's in pieces now you can return. But
yeah, that's done.
And you got yourself invited into an Amazon distribution warehouse. So I'm wondering if Amazon are quite as happy with you now, and what's their reaction been to the way you've been unpicking Alexa and its true
I would
cost?
like to think that all of the big AI companies have a really big responsibility right now to actually be much more honest about what it really takes to make the devices and the systems that we use every day. I think this is actually one of the crucial issues, if we want to talk about ethics, that this is an ethical promise that they should be making. Like, what does it take? How much energy does it take to create these AI models? Where do these devices come from? Where are they using conflict minerals? I mean, all of the sorts of questions that have to go into these profoundly complex logistical chains and supply chains. Frankly, I think this is a burning ethical question. And I would like to think that in some ways I'm doing Amazon a service here, because we can have a conversation that perhaps they weren't quite ready to have, but I do happen to think is one of the most important conversations that we need to have right now. I mean, when I say that I think this is urgent, I mean, we are sitting amongst a fire front right now. To pretend that these things don't come at a cost, I think, is a luxury that we can no longer afford.
But how do we call them to account? I mean, if you buy yourself some AirPods, then the battery's not replaceable. You can't repair them. They're not designed to be repaired.
That's right. And it's even deeper than that. And this is something that I find really fascinating, is that we've gone through this period in history where we honestly thought that we could just rip things out of the ground indefinitely. And this also came at a time that many of you have probably heard of Moore's law, like this idea that computational power would double every 2 years. And if you think all the way back, for those of you who used to have little tiny computers like Apple IIe's, and you'd be like, oh, I've got these big floppy disks, and I've got to change 5 of them to try and play one tiny game. This idea of storage was always like, it was something you had to fight for. But we've had this period of just vast amounts of increasing computational capacity and processing. And so we've created this bloatware, these systems that we just thought could get bigger and bigger forever and ever. And then now that we've hit the end of Moore's law, we can't actually fit any more of this kind of processing capacity into our chips. We're having to stop and say, we cannot keep doing it this way. And I think the same is true right through the whole product chain, from your earbuds to the most abstract AI model. We have to say, what is the true cost of this?
But I mean, one of the reasons why we're all going to have new smartphones in 4 years' time is because of the built-in redundancy.
Precisely.
In 4 years' time, they'll upgrade the operating system and it won't work anymore, and so you're left with no choice.
Precisely. Well, so answer me this, Toby, as somebody who thinks deeply on these questions. How do you think that's going to change things? If we're hitting an end now where Moore's law is over, and this industry has become just driven by data and driven by these short consumer cycles, what's going to shift?
Well, I think the problem is that they'll still build in redundancy. Like car manufacturers used to build in redundancy, because otherwise you're not going to go and buy the next car, you're not going to go and buy the next iPhone. Even if it's not that we need more computing, they'll build in redundancy one way or the other. They'll take out the jack, so you have to go and buy something else. They'll stop supporting the operating system on your machine, and you'll have to go and buy the latest machine.
So I guess the question is, how long are we prepared to put up with that? Because it's at a point where, right now, I think many of those ways of thinking and ways of dealing with computation have reached an end. And maybe we haven't quite realized it yet, but we're going to realize it within the next few years. So at that point, I think some really hard questions have to be asked. And for me, because I'm much more in the AI space than in, say, the consumer device space, my question always becomes, where do we actually need to use these systems? Where are they really helping us? And where are they actually potentially harming us? So we can actually start to think about, not just apply AI on everything, like we're just, oh, this bit of AI here and sprinkle some magic AI over there, but start to think much more specifically about what is this tool good for and where is it actually costing us too much? So I can think about that from the sort of abstract AI level, but we can ask this question all the way down through the stack.
But aren't we back to Joe Weizenbaum? We're seduced by the convenience.
I think that's right. I think we are. And I think what's interesting is that the more we look into the conveniences, I mean, if you think about what's so fascinating about Alexa is that system that we've talked about tonight, that whole gigantic planetary network is so that you can say, Alexa, play my favorite track. Now, think about what energy it costs if you reach out and press, I don't know, in my case, a bit of vinyl, like, play a record or, press something on Spotify. That's what you've just spun up to do that one simple action. So I think for this moment, we have to start doing that, exactly that thought experiment. What is this for, and is that convenience worth it?
So part of the problem, and you're right to blame it, is people like myself, a sea of white dudes who are behind much of this.
There are a lot of them in AI, it's true.
But even they are stepping up and complaining, or many of us are stepping up and complaining. You see tech workers in many of the tech companies, Google, for example, Facebook, complaining.
Yep.
What should we be learning from those people? What those protests and...
Yes, I mean, I would say this is much more than complaint. What you're starting to see right now in the enormous worker protests, I mean, 20,000 people walked out of Google worldwide on the same day to protest what they've been doing in terms of their payments to men around sexual harassment suits and a range of other issues as well. Now, that was an extraordinary action, but we've also seen dozens of other actions from workers saying, we're really concerned about the way this system works and classifies people, to the military uses of AI, to the way that AI is being used on the border as part of Trump's family separation policy. I mean, these workers are in some ways our early warning system. I think that is one of the most important lessons right now, is to listen to workers, because they understand what's going on inside the big tech titans. Because in the end, these companies are extremely, extremely hard to see into. They're protected by trade secrecy. They really can't talk much about what they do because of fear of competition and everything else. So we've created an opaque black box that produces opaque black boxes. It's extremely difficult to see into that industry. So in this sense, whistleblowers and workers are some of the most important people right now, because they're the ones who are telling us what's actually going on.
The challenge is even deeper than that, because, I mean, not only are they very secretive and it's very difficult to see in them, they're incredibly powerful.
Oh, yes.
The 5 largest companies on the planet by market capitalization are all technology companies.
That's
and
right.
They don't turn up at Congress when you ask them to come and tell us what you've been doing.
Or they do, and they just don't answer your questions.
or maybe that you perverted the course of our democracy.
Precisely.
So how are we going to call them to account?
Well, this is the biggest democratic question right now, is what are we going to do? I mean, we can trace these lines back to the Citizens United case. We can trace these back to the types of consolidation of power that we've seen across the sector. There's a lot of discussion right now, particularly in the US, about what to do. And one of the really common answers that people say is, I'll break up the technology companies. And what's interesting is that I don't think that solves the sorts of questions that we've been talking about tonight. Like, if you just have 5 Facebooks all extracting data and all creating their own massive AI models that use an enormous amount of energy, have we actually made things better? We might have actually made things worse. I think what we need to look at much, much more closely is true regulatory power. We need to regulate this sector if indeed we believe that this is a powerful tool, like all other powerful tools, from nuclear energy to the car to airplanes. We regulate them. It is outrageous to me that we have a system right now where these companies are barely regulated. So I think that is something that is very commonly understood. We had Gdpr come through in Europe last May, and what we saw, even though it's an imperfect piece of legislation, is that it caused a change. all of the tech companies actually had to reshard their servers. They had to change what they did so that if you're receiving those websites or social media services in Europe, you're actually receiving something different. It has different terms and conditions. So it can be done. It just shows us that these systems are not, because I'm sure you remember, they used to say, oh, we couldn't possibly meet GDPR. It'll be outrageous. It'll be the end of the industry. Surprise, surprise, it wasn't. So I think regulation in a weird way is actually healthy for the sector, and I think the sector has to realize that so many of the problems from Cambridge Analytica to what we've seen in terms of bias and discrimination is because of this total lack of thinking about the consequences of what's being built.
But if you take a company like Facebook, I mean, if you actually regulate it so it behaved well, would there be anything left?
Very good question, Toby. I like this question. Well, you might notice that Facebook is not what Facebook used to be. So Facebook is trying very, very hard to be your next financial services provider. Facebook is trying very, very hard to think about how it's going to start creating infrastructure. So it's going to be an infrastructure company. You're starting to see diversification of AI into healthcare, into finance. They're all very rapidly saying, we can't just be doing this one thing. We want to be doing everything for you. So the question is not so much would Facebook disappear, but what is Facebook right now? It's certainly not a social media company. In so many ways, I think of it as this giant bait and switch where you think you're communicating with your friends and your family, but actually you are creating a completely different AI system and you're training it with all of your most intimate personal data. It is actually something very different to what we thought it was as recently as 5 years ago. And I think that's what we're going to start to see more and more, is that Amazon used to sell books, remember? I mean, do you remember that? We're talking about one of the most powerful extended logistic companies in the world, and it is doing something very different to what it first began as, not that long ago. We're talking about 10 years. So what we're looking at now is a profound sea change in terms of what we even think AI will be.
So are you going to be optimistic about the future? I'm just going to tell you one fact. So back in 2008, the Wallace Wurth Lecture was by the chair of the IPCC, Dr. Pakuri, who warned us of the risk of climate change and we needed to take mitigating action now.
Right.
11 years later, we are seeing that we didn't take mitigating action. So how are we going to be sure that we wake up to the very clear call that you were giving us tonight, that the technology has got some really immense downsides on the sustainability of our environment, on the sustainability of our societies? Are you optimistic?
Well, let me put it this way. The best trick the devil ever pulled was making us think that we have individual power to change things like climate change. Same goes with AI. Take climate change. We know that there are 100 companies in the world that are responsible for 74% of carbon emissions. It's 100 companies. And so when we talk about change, it's not about how we recycle or we turn off our lights. This is about collective action. And there's something I'm excited about in terms of what we really can embrace in the next 10 years is how are we going to work together to think about collective action to shut down things that are literally ending the sorts of capacities of our civilization that we thought could just be expected. And I think that's something that we're starting to see. I mean, the worker protests are the same. I mean, you're seeing people start to say, we cannot fix this individually. This is not an individual choice model. This is time to start thinking about collective action together.
Well, I think, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I think that's a wonderful, positive moment to end on. AI Extinction Rebellion is going to be forming very soon, ladies and gentlemen. But to say, to thank you for coming this evening, thank Kate for a fantastically provocative, thoughtful lecture. To say, if you'd like more, I believe there's going to be some details about the Gandhi Lecture, which is the next event the Centre of Ideas is putting on early next year. And to say thank you very much again, and good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.